Bioshock was groundbreaking in many regards when it released in 2007, though fundamentally it shared many consistencies with Irrational's System Shock series. What elements of System Shock translated into Bioshock, and what was refined, altered, and innovated upon to create the world of Rapture? Let's take a look at the long road from System Shock to Bioshock. Everyone knows where the game ended up, but I think fans would be interested to learn where this game or the idea of doing this game started. And I think, folks know System Shock and the legacy of that game, huge fan base. Did it start as a System Shock game initially?
No, I mean, because we didn't have the rights to that, right? We kind of felt that there was more game design to mine there. That it was sort of, we did that one game, and it was sort of the first game that really combined shooting and RPG. And it was a very small budget. It was a very small team, and it was the first game we had ever done. So we got pretty lucky, I think, in terms of how well it came out. But the odds were sort of stacked against it. And the team, was really enthusiastic about doing a game like that. And time had evolved, and the team was much more. We had done a bunch of games together, and we had a stable technology base, and we were like, okay, well, which System Shock 2 was not. I mean, that engine, no game had ever shipped on that engine. It was a very crude piece of technology. Most of us had never shipped a game at the time. So well, what if we had a stable technology base, and we had a team that was more experienced and more seasoned, and we had, an actual, like, art director, and which we didn't really have on System Shock 2. What could we do? And so I think there was a lot of enthusiasm in the team to really try to do a more mature version of that kind of game. This is before we had sold the company to Take-Two, and we were an independent developer, right? We were sitting there, we were using the money we made from other development deals we had, and we would try to scrape together whatever time and money we had to work on this thing. And it was not actually something I was particularly keen on doing. The team was much more keen on doing a sort of a System Shock-ish game than I was, because...
As you were pitching, right? Like System Shock 3 at one point, right?
Well, I mean, there was an actual System Shock 3 that we were pitching back in the day when we were right after System Shock 2, but that never happened.
Right, yeah.
We couldn't get anybody interested, because System Shock 2 sold like 5 copies, right? And so as the business guy, the guy who had to not only just sort of write the content, but the guy who had to go out and get the deals and pay everybody, I wasn't particularly excited about doing this, because it was very disappointing when we did System Shock 2 and nobody bought it. It got great reviews. It got these insane reviews, but it left us in a place where it didn't really move the needle for us in terms of making payroll. So I wasn't super excited about it, because I didn't see a publisher be interested in it, and I didn't see the audience actually be particularly interested in this kind of game. And it was really the team who convinced me to invest in this, because their enthusiasm. I think a lot of them came to the studio because of System Shock 2. And so finally they sort of battered me down. And it's good they did, because I was not the first fan of doing this.
And I know initially there was something called the Serene Dawn. That was a spaceship? Or what was that?
No, that was
the name of a cult, right?
Cult.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay.
That one's, I think, been lost to the... If I remember correctly, Serene Dawn was a cult. You were playing as a deprogrammer that was infiltrating the cult, and your name happened to be Carlos Coelho, who was one of our programmers at the time.
It's named after him, yeah. There was a story notion that I always really found interesting, which was that you have these cults, and you have sometimes people who they're these sort of characters who really live on the edge of the gray morality, which is these guys who come in and essentially kidnap people out of these cults or rescue them, depending on how you look at it. Because what it really is, from a functional standpoint, it's a kidnapping, right? You're coming to an adult and you're saying, you're hired by their parents or whoever. And this was in the story, it was like a senator whose daughter joined one of these religious movements called the Serene Dawn, you said?
Yeah,
the Serene Dawn. And I always thought that was a really interesting tension of this hero who's basically a kidnapper. And taking a young woman against her will out of the place that she was in. Now, you could also make the other argument that, well, she was not really there by her will. But there's a really interesting conversation that goes on there. I think there was actually a Kate Winslet movie, a Harvey Keitel Kate Winslet movie, which dealt with a similar theme. Because usually you hear that story, these deprogrammers as a sort of heroic kind of notion. But I always thought that, well, there's something interesting about agency going on there, and about are people entitled to make bad mistakes, or is it a bad mistake? It all depends on the person. And I'm not a fan of religious cults or religion in general, but there seemed to be an interesting discussion of freedom there and independent decision making. And I thought that idea was cool, and that was sort of the basis of it for a while. But it was really mostly for the purpose of, we needed something to go out and pitch to publishers, and so we know we didn't have a ton of time to really develop it. So that sounded like, all right, this will do for now.
And was that pre-Underwater City? I mean, this was just like an idea for a story.
We may have stepped away from that to do the cult thing, but then we went back to the underwater.
No, we had that one room, remember?
We had the one World War II room with the roaches on the ground and like these weird test tube things that you could walk around. I don't know where that fell. It could have been underwater. There was no windows.
The thing is, we were a small business, right? And we were trying to figure out a way to sell this thing with spending the least amount of money, because we didn't have any money. We didn't have a pocket piston. So we would do this demo that was one room basically, just to show. And I'd write up a document, and we'd take it around. And I'd fly around the country, and be like, "Here's our room." It was a different time, And
we had just come off of SWAT 4. One of the advantages we had is that we were so familiar with that engine at that point that we could really start cranking through, small rooms and lighting and making things look good. So
I took it on the road to sell it to somebody, and nobody cared. We'd go to a publisher, and look, they have to make money, right? And we say, oh, it's sort of a spiritual successor to System Shock 2, and they'd be like, well, how did that sell? And I'd be like, my mom likes it, and they would be like, well, we can't, and usually we'd be talking to a fan. A lot of executives, like sort of junior executives, were fans of System Shock, and they'd go to their boss and they'd be super excited, and their boss would open up, their Excel spreadsheet and be like, "No, we can't do this." And I think the pitch probably evolved as we kept trying different permutations trying to sell, but we were also out there trying to sell like 2 or 3 other things at the time. We had a pitch for a game called Monster Island, and
well, our SWAT 5 pitch was
Zombie SWAT.
Yeah, we had just come off of SWAT 4, which is like hardcore tactical, and we decided they wanted us to do another SWAT, and we didn't really want to do another hardcore tactical game. So we're like, what if we added zombies to SWAT? Like, you're a SWAT team that fights zombies and werewolves. That sounds awesome. And it was like, no, it doesn't.
And this is before. This is before zombies were a thing.
Yeah.
And so we came up with this thing called Division 9.
Division 9, yeah.
That probably would have been even a bigger financial success than Bioshock.
Wow.
But we couldn't get anybody interested in it.
You didn't have enough werewolves in the demo, I think.
We had 0 werewolves in the demo. Yeah, we were going to have werewolves, weren't we?
Werewolves and vampires. That was the
whole, really?
Werewolves,
the whole, vampires, zombies.
Just throw it all the Universal Studios monsters from like.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So what happened was we couldn't sell it, but we were always sort of independent minded, and so I said, well, what if we sort of did this in reverse? Instead of getting a publisher first, then doing a press tour on it, what if we sort of did the press first? Yeah. And we called up a guy, Andrew Park, who was at GameSpot at the time, who was a fan of System Shock 2 and a great guy. And I said, will you come out and look at this thing we're doing and write a story on it? And he was like, sure. And Andrew flew out, and we showed him what we had, which is this very, very rudimentary thing about an underwater base. And he wrote up an article and sort of featured as that this is the spiritual successor to System Shock 2. And the next day, the phone started ringing from publishers who now all of a sudden saw the article was getting all this pickup and all these comments, and people were excited. And that really, I think, put it over the top in terms of being able to sell it, even though it was not Bioshock at that point. It was called Bioshock, but it was not Bioshock. There would have been I don't think there would have been a game. We never would have sold it without Andrew coming out doing that.
My belly's